Hey guys, welcome to Thrive in Christ. Today I want to talk about guarding your heart when it comes to relationships. And in this video, I'm not going to teach you how to build walls and fortresses where you keep yourself from other people. See, a lot of people have walls up a lot bigger than the Great Wall of China because either they've been hurt before or they don't want to deal with certain relational issues they're having. And in this video, I'm not going to teach you how to build walls. I'm going to teach you how to have better boundaries when it comes to relationships because sometimes our boundaries can be out of whack. That's why it's important to set healthy boundaries, healthy guardrails where you can have healthy relationships. And there's two different kinds of boundaries that are important. Number one, it's important to have an intimacy boundary. And mean what I mean by that is it's important to share in terms of sharing your heart with people. It's important to share your heart with people that you can trust. Number one, and number two, share your heart with people that want to connect with you. And I think what tends to happen a lot is I've had this happen many times before, and people mean well and stuff, but they come up to me and say, "Hey, because I've been troubled in the past. Went through a dark time for several years when I was in my late teens, early 20s. I've had people tell me, we really care about you, but we really want to help, and I'm grateful for the help I received from them and stuff. But it's real easy to take that as that person wanting to be friends with you, and there's a completely different. They're two different things. What tends to happen with a lot of people is that they have this insecurity where if someone of the opposite sex is real friendly to them, all of a sudden it just lights them up. And it causes them to fall for that other person because that person is being friendly to them. Maybe it's an insecurity, maybe it's a past rejection issue they were dealing with, but a lot of times people might come up to them and say, "Hey, we're here to help. We're here if you need for us if you need us," but they're not really wanting to be your best friend, or they're not really wanting to be friends with you. They're just wanting to help. When it comes to guarding your heart, it's important to recognize the cues. Especially I have Asperger's. So it's difficult for me to read certain cues sometimes. It's difficult for a lot of people to read certain cues sometimes. But one of the cues you got to be careful about is some people are just polite. They're just wanting to help, or they're just wanting to be nice. And they're not really meaning to come across as they're wanting anything more than an acquaintanceship with you. I've had that happen to me on several occasions. I've had girls tell me, "Hey, we really care about you, and we're here if you need prayer, here for you if you need help or anything like that." And since at that time I had a need for a friends at that time, it really caused me to think I had a friendship with these girls when in fact they were just wanting to help. And we have to be very weary of that because some people are just nice people. They're just friendly. Bible says we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourselves. We're supposed to love people. But it's real easy to mistake that as wanting something more than a friendship or acquaintanceship with them. And that's why when it comes to friends, if people come up to you and say, "Hey, we really care about you, we're here if you need us, feel free to come to us about anything," that's when what tends to happen is people tend to, when they start sharing and expressing their issues with certain people, number one, it pushes them away if it's too much. Number two, it causes them to develop a soul tie with that person, a connection with that person, especially if that person doesn't want to connect with that person or be friends with that person. And it can cause a lot of different issues. And that's why it's important when it comes to friends to, only mainly share your heart on a normal basis with people that are wanting to be friends with you, that are wanting to, be there for you. Whether they're just there to help you out, they're just there to be there, especially people that you don't just share your problems with them, but you can talk about the weather, talk about science, talk about sports, talk about sitcoms like Urkel, Steve Urkel. I'm kidding, but you can pretty much talk about anything with them. And it takes time to develop a friendship like this. You're not going to have this with everybody. And that's why it's important to make sure that you're not going around sharing all your personal business with everybody. Because a lot of people don't care and a lot of people get annoyed by it. Number three, a lot of people, are not a good fit when it comes to being a good friend to you. And if you have, let's say, I'm going to say this from my point of view, but if you have girls come up to you and say, for a guy, you have girls come up to you and say, hey, we really care about you and we're here if you need us, but they don't want to socialize with you at all. Like you don't have any social relationship with them where they're not getting to know you, they're not talking to you and interacting with you, then that's a problem. Like I said before, some people are just polite, they're just wanting to help, or they're wanting to be nice. But if someone claims to be your friend, someone who says they're wanting to be friends with you, but they're not really wanting anything more than an acquaintanceship with you. They're not really wanting to socialize with you that much. Chances are they're not really your friends. They're just there to help. There's a difference. There's a difference between a care acquaintance and a friend. Care acquaintances, they care about you. They're there for you if you need them when you need help. But other than that, they don't want anything to do with you. But if you have friends, you can call them up and talk about the weather, talk about sports, talk about Steve Urkel. I'm kidding. I don't know why I keep mentioning him. I like Steve Urkel, but to talk about different things. You don't just have to talk about the issues. But if someone is just wanting to help you with your certain problems or help pray for you, and they don't want anything to do with you personally, that's going to end up being a major, major problem. And I've had people like this too. They cared about me. They prayed for me, probably nightly and stuff, but they didn't really want much to do with me socially. So I had to make a decision whether or not I wanted to come to them normally for problems or not. And I had to enforce a boundary there with these people because they didn't want to socialize with me. They just wanted to help. And I'm like, there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't want to confide in someone on a normal basis that I'm not close friendships with. And I had to make that boundary over time because I started having these type of relationships where people cared about me, but they just didn't want much to do with me or anything like that. So I just didn't share much with them. And that's why it's important to guard your heart when it comes to how much you share with people, especially the opposite sex, because you can end up developing feelings for people or just developing a soul tie with them that's really, 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 really hard to break. And that's why it's important to make sure to guard your heart with all diligence when it comes to developing friendships with people. Make sure you're actually friends with them. You have a normal, ongoing relationship with them before you start sharing your problems with them on a normal basis, even if it's just prayer. And if someone just wants to pray for you and that's it, I probably wouldn't share your whole heart with them. So just be very, very leery about that. And the last thing I want to talk about very briefly before I close, and Proverbs 7 warns about this, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to this. So Proverbs chapter 7, I'm going to skip to the end of the chapter. And the section heading for the NIV version is warning against the adulterous woman. There's a whole story that, Solomon gives, and it's very, very deep, and I encourage you to read it in this chapter. In verses 24 through 27, it says, Now then, my sons, listen to me. Pay attention to what I say. Do not let your heart turn to her ways or stray in her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are a mighty throng. Her house is the highway to the grave, leading down to the chambers of death. Some versions say the highway to hell. See, when it comes to some guys, for some reason, their main issue is with the opposite sex, is with women. For some reason, if a girl's nice to them, or if a girl talks to them on a normal basis, for some reason, it kind of clicks, something just clicks on the inside of them when that happens. And that's why it's important for God to do a healing work in our hearts concerning this, so that we can use self-control when it comes to this desire for the opposite sex. Not let it become more corrupt than it, or not corrupt, but more complicated than it really needs to be. And the fact is God created us all with that desire. There's nothing wrong with that. But when we allow that desire to become something that it shouldn't, that's where sexual morality comes into place. It's where a lot of these different fornications, all these different types of sin issues come into play, because God wants us to stay pure. And part of the issue is we have this longing. Some of us have this longing for the opposite sex. It's why some girls get sent to an all-girls school, because they're so boy crazy. That's happened many, many times. It's when we get all crazy for the opposite sex, it's when things get to be a big problem. And that's why the Lord wants to do a healing work in our heart, if that's the case. If we're weak towards the opposite sex, which a lot of guys are, a lot of girls are too. If we're weak, we need to allow the Lord to heal us of that, so that when we do get into a relationship, then all the right boundaries will be in their place, and then everything will run smoothly. But when we don't have good boundaries, when we're, allowing sin to take root in our lives, it can end up causing a whole weed of destruction in our lives. And that's why it's important that if we have this need, and it seems like it's a big deal, it becomes an idol in our lives, we need to cast down that idol and surrender that over to the Lord, so that we can walk in holiness and walk in righteousness when it comes to the opposite sex. And the reason I'm being general about this, because I can do a whole sermon on this, and it's a very lengthy sermon with a lot of different moving parts to talk about. But from the main emphasis I'm talking here is this desire, it's this need. And when people indulge in sin and all types of lustful pleasure and stuff, it can become warped. And that's why it's important to always guard our heart against sinful tendencies and sinful desires, so that we can live pure and live a holy and godly life. And these were the three main things I wanted to talk about when it comes to guarding your heart, especially when people are just being nice. Number one. Number two, make sure that you're actually friends with someone before you start sharing all your personal business with them. Make sure that it's someone that you trust and someone that you have a connection with, and also make sure to use self-control when it comes to this desire that God's put in our lives, and make sure it doesn't get warped. If we are warped, allow God to heal our hearts and help us move forward in purity, holiness, and righteousness. And I hope this has blessed you. It's blessed me, and hope everyone has a great day. God bless you.